This is Dateline News and Conversation. Well, front page just about everywhere in the world. The ongoing genocide of Israel on Palestine. But what's on the front pages, even here in Russia, are the college and university campuses, the students who are protesting and camping out all over the United States, Canada, and even some other countries. Well, we're going to continue talking about Israel. Tonight, my guest is a born and raised Jew. He's a good friend. And we're going to talk about what it looks like through his eyes. And we'll talk about the myth of anti-Semitism. So I want to welcome back to the show my good friend from Chaing Mai, Thailand, Eric Arnow. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Great to be back.
Well, you're the Bumble Buddhist, self-proclaimed. I'm really always happy to have you on the show. In your email to me earlier this week, you described how several generations of your family are Jewish. You were born and raised in the United States. You went to Jewish schools. You went to Jewish summer camps. I'd like, from your perspective, and I'd like you to tell the story of how you migrated, if that's the right word, from Judaism to Buddhist philosophy, because you have a totally different view now, I think, of what's going on. So I'm going to just throw it to you. Tell me about your background, your upbringing, your family, and how it led you to where you are today.
Okay. So, I was born in 1948, and that's 3 years after the end of World War II. As I've mentioned in other discussions that we've had, one of the most formative relationships I had was with my grandmother, who was born in Lithuania, and she was a socialist, she was basically a socialist revolutionary. I think no one talked about past history, but my sense is that she came over probably in 1905 to escape a police sentence and possibly worse, because she was engaged in revolutionary activity. But she told me in a very seminal conversation one time that her family had all been killed by Hitler during World War II, which had a marked effect on my consciousness. And I've always had a kind of a sensitivity, a significant sensitivity, maybe oversensitivity. I don't know whether it's oversensitivity or useful sensitivity towards the tendency of overweening power to cause serious problems. So even though I never read Karl Marx, I majored in German in the university, but Marx wasn't even offered as a philosopher or a writer, which shows you the stultification of the Western educational system. Nevertheless, this was during the Vietnam War. I'm watching what's going on, and because I for some reason, I maybe had a knack, or I developed a natural skepticism. I'm not sure. I used to read the New York Times Sunday magazine, New York Times Sunday News of the Week and Review, religiously every week while I was in high school, and I noticed these anomalies about, how the war in Vietnam was reported, and it was quite clear that they were justifying, slaughter of millions of innocent people that never caused any harm to us. At the same time, I was going to a Jewish summer camp, and it was named Camp Tevye, which is the name of the famous tailor in Fiddler on the Roof. And we sang Israeli folk songs and had Jewish services and so on and so forth. And it was all it was a very pleasant experience. One time there was a video that talked about what happened in the Holocaust, which was, harrowing to say the least. But the thing that my first doubt as to what was going on with this narrative was the holiday, which is called Tish B'Av. Tish B'Av took place in August. It's the lunar month of Av, and it's the 9th of Av, which is the Jewish Memorial Day, so to speak. And basically, the way I understand it, and forgive all my Jewish relatives and friends if I offend you, but it's the Oh Poor Us Day, and it's the Jewish Victim Day, and of course, the Jewish people during World War II suffered, terribly, unconscionably during that period of time. But not mentioned enough is that 6 million Poles died, 3 million Belarusians died, 27 million Soviets died, 20 plus, 30 plus, who knows how many countless Chinese died. So this was a huge human catastrophe for all of humankind. And it just seemed kind of strange to me that we Jews got to merit special attention. So that was something that I felt was significant. The other thing was that during that time, this was 1967, was the 1967 war, and there was this theme of "so sorry we won. We were attacked by those dirty Arabs, and we showed them, didn't we?" But subsequent um, analyses showed that they had actually orchestrated this in order to attack and take over more Palestinian land. So the Jews, the Zionist hands have never been clean in this. And as I pointed out in a video that I've done in a separate video, comparing how Iraq was treated for the quote unquote incubator baby story, where Iraq was attacked and occupied by the United States over a story which was false, where a woman accused the soldiers of Saddam Hussein's army of going into hospitals and taking babies out of incubators and letting them die on the cold floor. That was a flat out lie based on a story concocted by Hill and Knowlton, a public relations firm. Like they call it public relations. This is, we can't call things by their true names. This is a lying organization that promotes wars based on lies. That is U.S. policy. It's been U.S. policy for decades, if not centuries. So we need to clear that up right away. You compare that with what has happened in Gaza. In Gaza, many hospitals have been bombed to shreds. Hundreds of people have been killed. And rather than being taken over by some kind of UN mandate or any kind of mandate, NATO took it upon itself to bomb Serbia based on its narrative. And the U.S., bombed and attacked Afghanistan and Iraq, and has attacked dozens of countries without any mandate at all. And here we have this country that has been killing tens of thousands of people, and nobody's doing a damn thing about it. Yes, they complain. They go to the International Court of Justice, and we all say yes. We're pretty sure it's genocide. No, I'm sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Now, there's another aspect of this, which is that I just got an email from a cousin of mine who lives in New York. Nice guy, and he was telling me how I wrote him a letter which was rather, what can I say? It was neutral. I didn't point any fingers. I simply said that the events of October 7th have resulted in massive bombing, and there's, these kinds of things going on, and what is his opinion about it? And he said, what Hamas did is unconscionable and it's terrible, but what Israel is doing is starving them and bombing them is also terrible. So two wrongs don't make a right. Well, the issue that I take with that is, and I'm going to get into this in a much deeper way. The issue that I have with that is that the history of Zionist atrocities against the Palestinian people goes back a long, long way. And it's not just, hearsay or anything like that. There's a letter that everybody needs to read. It's called Einstein's letter to the New York Times, December 1948. And in that letter, which I recite word for word in that article that I wrote, he says that there's a fascist Nazi ideology at the heart of the people who are currying favor within the U.S. political establishment and establishing themselves as the leaders of Israel as a country. So right off the bat, from 1948, you have the most prominent people. Hannah Arendt, who is a great historian who she documented Eichmann in Jerusalem. She documented the origins of totalitarianism, the banality of evil. And Einstein, who had been opposed to these armed groups and fascists and terrorists these are Jewish Zionist groups that had been committed assassinations, they'd committed bombings. This had all been going on before. This is 1947, 1948, assassinating peace mediators and so on. And for the Zionists to say they attacked us out of the blue in October 7th is the most disingenuous and willfully ignorant attitude that they could possibly have. It's a total disgrace. And the fact that they get away with it. And the worst, and even worse, is that the U.S. scratches their heads and scratches their chins and, well, what should we do? They're not acting appropriately enough. Maybe we should ask them not to. Well, how about just stop sending the bombs, stop sending the money? To his credit, people like Bernie Sanders have said the same thing, which is great. Jill Stein, who's also Jewish, both of them are Jewish. So you do see voices within the Jewish community talking about these issues and saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with the Zionist entity as it is. It's known as Israel. It was created under questionable circumstances in 1948. The Palestinians got a completely raw deal, which they objected to, and that has resulted in the last 75 years of this ongoing horror show.
So Eric, let me jump in. I have to jump in because you're a Jew, and for the last several minutes you've been using the term Zionism and Zionist. As a Jew, how would you explain this to a non-Jew? You referred to Israel and those who control it. You say it's a Zionist state. Just shed some light and help of a Jew just what this dichotomy really means.
Okay. Zionism is essentially a political philosophy that came out of centuries of discrimination against Jews throughout Europe. I would say that's a pretty accurate statement, generally speaking. At a certain point, there was more and more sentiment among the Jewish community thinking, we really need a place of our own, because here we are, we're stuck in France or Germany or England or wherever, and nobody likes us, they all hate us. We should just go out and find a place of our own where we can run our own affairs and where we'll have a refuge. And that was called Zionism. And the leader of it was somebody named Theodor Herzl, who was said to be an atheist. And there were other people like Chaim Weizmann and David Ben Gurion and Zev Zhabutinsky, and also Bibi Netanyahu's father, I think his name is Zev, I'm not sure, I forget his first name, was also a staunch Zionist. So Zionism was considered to be more of a political philosophy. And what they've done is they've appropriated it as conflated it with Judaism as a religion, which is very strange, because as other Jews have pointed out, how is it possible that atheists believe that God gave them the state of Israel? God gave them Palestine. If you don't believe in God, how can you possibly justify this non-entity that never existed and you don't believe in somehow gives you the right to go into another land and destroy the people who are living there, throw them out, and do all kinds of terrible things to them. So Zionism has really discredited itself. And I want to just add a little bit of, maybe you could say, exculpatory context to this, which is that at the end of World War II, you had kind of like two wings of Zionism. You had more of a socialist Zionism, and you had a, frankly, fascist Zionism. And there's actually a song that was sung by Jews in Palestine, and you can find it on YouTube. It shows a picture of a sign saying Jews in solidarity with our Arab brothers for a socialist Palestine. And the song, basically, the lyrics go something like, "Oh, you foolish little Zionists with your utopian mentality, you better get down to the factory and face reality. You tell us to go to Jerusalem and die as a nation. You need to wake up and face reality." So there was a possibility of Zionism being something very, very different. But embedded within Zionism, and I'm going to step on some toes here in the Jewish community, despite the fact that there are strong humanitarian influences within the Jewish community, at the same time there have been significant, I would say, anti-Christian and very insular attitudes towards the outsiders, towards the goyim. So what happened in 1948 was that the right-wing Zionists basically won, and the Zionists understood, at least implicitly, that they may not have been liked by the British and so on, but or the French or the Germans, but they represented a toehold for influence in the Middle East, because they are Europeans who are getting control of a major piece of real estate that controls the oil and controls crossroads for communication in that part of the world. So there was basically a deal done between the Americans, especially Truman was all behind this, as were many of the British and so on. So even though the British had mixed feelings about it, so they actually wanted to kill Winston Churchill, which I don't want to go into what kind of a person Winston Churchill was, but the bottom line was that Israel was created as a settler colonial enterprise to keep control of the Middle East for the collective West. So that is basically what Zionism was. But I want to go into the issue of Judaism, because what we're seeing now is that there are a lot of Jews who are good people, people like Aaron Mate, Gabor Mate, Max Blumenthal, Naomi Klein, Norman Finkelstein, who are all taking the side of the Palestinians, and rightfully so. So you have this element of the Jewish community that understands the difference between right and wrong. The problem is that within the Jewish deep mind, we could say, there are aspects of Jewish consciousness which are, I would have to call them just problematic. And to give you a specific example of that, just look at the Ten Commandments. And they're called commandments. They're not called like the law of gravity. Did God command you to fall from a building, or if you drop something off a desk that it's going to fall? No, it's just a law. It's just how things are. But this is called a commandment from an entity that is a mental construction. And it says, I am the Lord thy God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You owe me. Put no other gods before me. So what it's doing, and this is the first and second commandments, what it's doing is creating a mental box, mental framework for people to orient their whole consciousness around. It's a completely different idea than, well, maybe it's a good idea to, as Rabbi Hillel said, treat others as you'd want to have them treat you. The fact that you have as the basis of religion this idea that is such a fixed concept, so authoritarian in its nature, that it causes problems. There's another aspect of this, which is that trauma, in my opinion, is built into the Jewish consciousness. And what I mean by that is just the act of circumcision, which is where the male shortly after he's born has a piece of penis cut off, and that it's a painful thing. And if you're a baby and you have this painful thing and you have no control over it, it's a traumatic event. And there are studies that show that has an effect on people's psychology. So, you can be you grow up kind of paranoid. And when's the next time somebody's going to, attack me? So you have this kind of, it's not a dominant mentality, dominant mental characteristic, but it's playing in the background. And I want to give you another story, which I related in my email, where while I was at this Jewish summer camp, I was thinking, this narrative, first of all, it's very painful, and it's not very healthy to have to always be afflicted with this idea that the whole world is against you. I mean, is that really true? Are we the only ones in the world who've ever had difficulties with oppression? And when the Jews, mythically left the land of Egypt, they were technically considered free. Well, but what did they do after they got their freedom? After wandering the desert for 40 years, they go back to Palestine, and they decide, God says, oh, they gave this land to me, and now we're going to go and kill a bunch of people and take over again. So you have the same kind of mentality of, because we got treated like slaves, then see, there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to deal with this. The healthy way is, fortunately, we were freed from bondage, and now it was up to us to free other people from bondage. And if you have an idea like that, then you will find Jews in the civil rights movement, or Jews acting as social democrats, where they're really trying to improve things. Rosa Luxemburg, you know, Karl Marx, people of that nature who are addressing social issues of oppression and inequality and saying there has to be a better way to make this world work. But within the Jewish community, you also have people like the Rothschilds, who are bankers who have been trying to control things, for centuries, and the George Soroses and people of that nature. You have the Goldman Sachs, who are running Wall Street and are ripping off countries left and right using whatever means they can. And this is all, according to my standards of morality, not only is it criminal, but it doesn't work because it creates tremendous imbalances, which eventually, according to a Taoist idea of how things work, if you have a society that is so completely unbalanced, there's going to have to be some dramatic dislocation, like a social earthquake, so to speak, to make things right again. So, and this is something that I think that the Jewish community has not completely addressed.
Eric, we lost you for close to a minute. I'm not sure exactly where you left off, but you were talking about the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, these kind of people basically using their power and their wealth to control things. Pick it up from there.
Right. So what I'm talking about is the fact that you have within the Jewish community a kind of a dual, it's like a split personality, where you have the Rosa Luxemburg type of personality, who is seeking to have, real. She talked about, we need it's going to be either socialism or barbarism, and but you also have the bankers who just say we want more money for ourselves and less for everybody else, and to hell with everybody. So this is obviously a very dangerous tendency, and I would add that it's a tendency that again, sorry to step on people's toes, but the monotheistic worldview of a single entity that has control over the universe and decides what is right and what is wrong, and those who ascribe to believe in that entity now have a right to conflate their worldview with whatever they think is right, is a recipe for conflict. There's no room for people to go back and forth and look at other points of view and work things out in a harmonious way. It's the single entity, or it's the idolater, the infidel, so on and so forth.
Okay. As a theologian, that was my background and my training. I'm very much aware of the Old Testament, the New Testament, many of the things you've talked about. But what I really appreciated hearing from you was this monotheistic view of I forget the exact words you used, but a mental construct of this deity who is all-knowing and who gives you these laws. And I really appreciated the way you articulated that there's no room outside of that mental construct to recognize differences or alternative views. I found this very important, especially coming from you, my friend, a Jew, with your knowledge of the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, to shed light on that. Now, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but uh, are we heading towards a better understanding today of the mentality of the people in Israel? Now, I'm trying to be very careful with how I say this. I know that most of the people in Israel are Jews, but I also believe there is a very strong Zionist uh, element. And I also know that from polls that have been reported, that something like 60 to 70% of the Jews living in Israel are in favor of the genocide. I can you shed some light on how what we've been talking about Jewish history, their sense of trauma, their sense of being set free, and God's chosen people? How does this come into play today in Israel to allow that country to use obscene violence, barbarism, like I think we've never seen before in our lives? I don't know that it's ever been seen before. When you can have IDF soldiers shooting children in the head for sport, how can you help us understand that mentality?
Well, obviously, if you have a mentality of extreme victimhood, and I've seen videos of young Jewish girls, maybe 13 years old, singing with joy about killing the Nazis. Girls, those Palestinians are not. They do not have machine gun help. They don't have helmets, and they're not going to send you to Auschwitz. These are people. These are women and children mostly, and most of the men are not armed either. Uh, this is a false fear that you have been imbued with over successive generations, where I believe it's Gilad Atzmon, who's a famous dissident Jew living in England, and talks about the fact that people are deliberately psychologically traumatized to induce this sense of victimhood, of being enclosed, and what I call it is like it's it's voluntary enclosure in a ghetto. So you were so used to being uh, victimized and confined to a ghetto that you created a country that is essentially a ghetto, where you're surrounded by enemies. You create the enemies by attacking them constantly, and then when they counterattack, you say, you see what they're doing. They're so bad, and we're so innocent. This is as you alluded to in your earlier videos. This is an extreme psychological problem, and uh, I was talking over a year ago with a woman who is about 50 years old, I believe, and I met her at a yoga resort here in Thailand, which is owned by Israelis. And they all seem like quite nice people, but if you kind of scratch a little bit beneath the surface, you have this feeling of there's something psychologically, at least to my mind, there's something missing there. Where like I would ask these young women who had just finished military service, and we know that if you were in the military, you were put into extreme stress situations where you're basically forced to traumatize Palestinians, and what people don't understand, this is very important. The Eastern concept of non-dualism is that there's no difference between you and the other. What you do to the other, you are doing to your own mind. There was a study done years ago where the soldiers who went to Iraq and killed people were the ones who had the most post-traumatic stress disorder. When you kill and harm another human being, you are harming yourself. And that is, and I believe Sylvia even alluded to that point yesterday, that these people they're harming themselves. They're just reinforcing this trauma, this psychological injury that they're perpetuating. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Somebody pointed out to me recently that, and I knew this, that all Jewish young men and women must serve in the military, I think, for at least 1 year when they're indoctrinated. They're indoctrinated in what? About the other. And the other is the non-Jew, the Muslim, the Arab, the Christian. And I think when they're trained to not fight some fictitious computer war game. They're trained, I think, and I'd like you to shed some light on this, in the whole mindset of having to defend their country, Israel, from these less than human animals. Do you think that is something that also adds a layer of this consciousness or subconsciousness to these people living in Israel?
Absolutely. As we've all seen in previous conflicts, in World War II, in World War I, the Germans were the Huns, and in World War II, it was the Gooks, and the Japanese. And so this dehumanization of the people that our governments decide that we're supposed to kill, it's easier to kill something that isn't human. It's like, I confess, if I see a cockroach on my kitchen table, I'm probably not going to be as kind to it as I might be a human baby who is crying for some milk. It's like, we unconsciously rank living beings in terms of what we perceive to be their level of consciousness. And if as we saw with Yoav Galan saying, "Oh, they're human animals," well, that was nice. At least he said they're human animals. They're not just plain old-fashioned, spray them with raid animals. But the point remains that as long as they continue to demonize the other, and this, by the way, has been going on for decades, because even within the Jewish community, this is long before or outside of the issue of Israel. There's this thing of the goyim, and there's a kind of the goyim means the others, those who are outside of the chosen stockade, so to speak, where we the good guys are staying. So you've got this dynamic at play where people are essentially dehumanized. They're viewed as less than human, and there's literature showing that people like Menachem Begin were saying things like, these people are non-Jews, they should be our slaves, and this is how they talk. So this is a completely deranged, from my point of view, psychology.
Yeah. I've recently, and it's not the first time that I've seen this, but recently I heard or I saw an interview with one of the Jewish IDF soldiers, asking him, how he could kill a baby. And he said, the problem was, I didn't kill the father or the mother when they were babies. And this reminded me of a scene from The Godfather, when the young Vito Andolini was like 8 years old. and his mother took him to see the mafia Don Chicho. And her husband and Vito's father had insulted the mafia Don, and he had him killed. And she brought her young son, and she said, "Please, Don Chicho, don't kill my son. Don't harm him. He's not well. He's very weak, and he's not all there intellectually." And Don Chicho said, "But if I don't kill him now, someday when he grows up and he's strong, he will come for me." And this seems to be what I think has been said several times by Israelis. If we don't kill them now, they're going to grow up and they'll be stronger and they'll be more of a threat. I mean, we're talking about this mentality of how they view the Palestinians. It's really hard to comprehend. For me, it's almost impossible to understand that. And yet, as you mentioned, American soldiers indoctrinated, sent to war in Vietnam or wherever they're sent, they are taught to kill. But as you rightly said, most of those guys, and I know a lot of them that returned from Vietnam, have suffered terribly from post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I think that anybody who kills somebody else at some point must come to the realization they killed another human being. But that doesn't seem to be the case with the IDF and the people of Israel who are living there. Your thoughts?
You know, I saw an interview with an elderly, I don't know whether he was even IDF or Haganah or one of the precursors to the IDF, and he was talking and almost smiling about the atrocities that he was committing during the 1948 wars. So some people, and you find this even with look at the case of that SS soldier in Canada who is taken to the Canadian Parliament and given a standing ovation, and he's waving and, "Yeah, it was so great, and thank you for recognizing my service as a mass murderer." So some people are really beyond redemption as far as recognition of what they've done.
Yeah.
So it's a huge problem. One thing I wanted to mention, though, is that, and this raises the hope of forgiveness, because you have, I'm thinking of two particular cases. One was the Chechen Wars. So in Chechnya, the CIA went in, deliberately attempted to strip Chechnya away from the Russian Federation in I guess it was the 1990s. And Vladimir Putin, who was just coming into power at that time, was able to miraculously defeat that insurgency and turn these Chechens who had been fighting the Russian Federation into their most loyal soldiers. So that was an example of where this was like true redemption, where Muslim soldiers are defending poor Christians under attack in eastern Ukraine. After World War II, the CIA, as you and I I think we've discussed this, the CIA was backing these Banderite, these Nazi formations of Ukrainian who have their ideas of racial supremacy and were extremely brutal towards Russians, Poles, Jews, whoever they could get their hands on. And they were tracked down by the KGB or whoever the Soviet Union had at the time to get these people under control. By 1953, despite the efforts of the CIA, was able to track these people down, put them into prison, and at a certain point, after the secret speech where Stalin was severely criticized, these people were given amnesty essentially and freed from prison. And you would think that at that time, the Ukrainian nationalists would have given up their extreme ideology and come back and been productive citizens within the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. And we know that from 1956 on, I have Ukrainian friends who lived in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and I have a friend in Volgograd who's married. He has relatives in Ukraine, and he said there were no problems. So the question that arises is, at what point is forgiveness possible, and at what point is it not possible? And that I don't have an answer to. I also want to raise the issue which I raised with my Chinese friend regarding the issue of pacifism, because as we know, the Palestinians, after years of intifadas and trying nonviolent resistance, violent resistance, they tried everything they could. On October 7th, they either deliberately outsmarted or more likely the Israeli government let it happen on purpose. In my opinion, the Israeli government let it happen on purpose. They had to know that something was up. And one of the clues to that is that the Israelis call October 7th Israel's 9/11. Well, if you haven't fallen off a turnip truck, you know that the Israelis were deeply involved in 9/11. You had the dancing Israelis, you had these people photographing it. Yes, we knew that it was coming. The Israelis were warned not to be at the World Trade Center the day that it was taken down. So the Israelis had foreknowledge of 9/11. They certainly had foreknowledge of October 7th, and that they at a minimum let this happen. So the question arises: is to what extent do we owe? Does guilt fall? Where does guilt fall if we're going to measure it between Hamas and the IDF? If Gaza had simply been treated fairly, if they had allowed, I've wanted to say this to my Israeli counterparts who say there's no solution. I say there's a very simple solution. Respect. Just respect your opponent. Listen to your opponent. And if you listen to your opponent, maybe they'll listen to you. They may not, because as we saw with the people in these Banderite people who are under the influence of the US CIA, those people, they are not going to be willing listeners to the Russian point of view. These people are lost. But it's up to us to look at how do we discern who is savable, who can we actually work with to build a society that works for other people, and who are we simply going to have to protect ourselves from. And the Israelis have made the completely, in my view, a completely false determination of who their enemies are. They've created enemies, and this is where we are.
Yeah, I was interested to hear your opinion of what really happened on October 7th. I think a lot of us now believe that it was a false flag, or the Israelis let it happen. But I think that the thing that has got it, the attention of the entire globe. There are millions and millions and hundreds of millions of people around the world now protesting this obscene violence, this genocide by Israel on the Palestinians. College campuses, kids are coming out in the tens of thousands across the United States, Canada, and other countries, bringing attention to the world, to their own citizens, to the United States government, what is happening there, how horrendous it is, how unhuman it is. It seems to have awakened humanity in a lot of people. I wonder what your thoughts are, Eric, on whether or not this will be successful. We're already seeing the same fascist government, police violence on these people that we saw during Vietnam, that we saw during the Occupy movement. They basically shut it down over a weekend. We're seeing it happening today, and not just in the United States, but we're seeing it in other countries. Do you think this time might be different?
Yeah, the winds of change in the world are really shifting. We saw, Pepe Escobar just gave an excellent talk with Ding Haifong, and he was talking about the fact that you have three major sovereign countries. You have Iran rather, Russia, and China. And both of them recently have refused to kowtow, so to speak, how to bow down to the Western countries. And they're saying, we're going to build a multipolar world. Your idea of this us versus them mentality, where the us people, it's just us, are going to be running things, it's not going to work. And we would hope that a philosophical discussion would entail this change of heart. Now, what we're seeing in the United States now with these younger people, and it's not all younger people. My cousin just wrote me that his kids, he and I are contemporaries, but his kids are completely behind destroying Hamas and so on. So it's not like this is a mass movement, but you do have significant numbers of young people who are seeing through Western imperialism and realizing that this really doesn't work. And the fact that they even go to universities, which means they're the most privileged kids, that is a very good sign that that they can change things. The other aspect of it is just the reality that the Western financial system, the military is not succeeding on the battlefield. And at some point, we hope the powers that be in the West, who are completely incompetent, completely corrupt, what the U.S. educational system did was it dumbed down the population so successfully that they dumbed down themselves. So they ended up creating stupid people like Biden or like Blinken, those people of that ilk, who they make mistake after mistake after mistake, and they're being completely outplayed by people who have a much deeper understanding of how the world works. So our problem is that they may do something really, really desperate, and that's the big concern. And the Russians and the Chinese have been playing this, and the Iranians, even with their attack on the Israeli Air Force base, they did it in a way that Israel couldn't. They couldn't overreact in a way. They couldn't justify, doing some kind of major bombing attack. At least that's how it appears. The Israelis may have may have attempted a major nuclear attack on Iran, which is what Pepe Escobar asserts as a very strong possibility. But they haven't initiated a major counterattack against Iran, and the West, as much as they say, like the British and the French and so on. Oh, the French, we're going to send in 2,000 troops to Ukraine. I'm sure that the Russians are really quaking in their boots over that. So you're seeing some elements of reality breaking through to the elites in the West that the game really is up, and you're going to have to play by the real rules, not your rules, but the real international rules where people and peoples and countries treat each other with respect and honesty. So that's what we hope for, but there are no guarantees with the people who are running the West.
Yeah. You mentioned that the times are different, the winds have changed, and we've got this movement towards multipolarity, a new world order, a new vision. And now I look at all these students, and it's not just in the United States, there's young people all over the world that are rising up in these protests because it's revolting. And I think they all realize that this is not the future they want for themselves. I think they realize, because of what the empire has done and its vassals, has basically dehumanized everyone. It's basically denied all of them a future that is anything better than serfdom. I think it's really clear. And so, like you, I'm very hopeful that this movement, two movements, BRICS and towards multipolarity, and the people of the world and millions of youth around the world, I think we'll begin to see that vision that there can be a better way, that respects, as you mentioned before, that respects the other. This is what Putin has been saying better than anybody else. The respect for the individuality and the sovereignty of all nations and all peoples. The strict observance of international law, not your rules-based order. The respect for the UN Charter, the principles of the United Nations. I think when you put these things together, it is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the hope that by refusing to fight and to kill and to use wars, we can create a better world based on respect and dialogue. Eric, I can't thank you enough. I've gained a lot of insight from you, not just tonight, but in all of our previous discussions. The time we spent together here in Russia last year. And I look forward to having you back again. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Regis. I'll look forward to seeing you in person again too. If not in person, then on the screen.